Family Resource Center on Disabilities is not a law firm or a legal service agency. Family Resource Center on Disabilities is a Region 1 Parent Training and Information Center of Illinois. You can reach us at 312-939-3513. Email us at info@frcd.org and visit our website at www.frcd.org. We encourage you to follow us on Twitter at FRCDPTI, subscribe to our YouTube page at FRCD1231, and like us on Facebook. Thank you for joining Family Resource Center on Disabilities Lunch and Learn webinar, Dissecting the IEP Part 2, Building Successful Goals. This presentation will be presented by parent trainer Elliot Marks, and this webinar is being recorded. If you have questions anytime during the presentation, please either raise your hand in the attendees box or type your question in the question box of your control panel. The PowerPoint and handouts will be emailed to all participants following this presentation. Okay, thank you, Elliot. You can begin.
Okay, thanks, Paula. Okay, today's presentation, as Paula said, is about getting smart about goal writing. And, you know, over the years, many parents have asked me about particular portions of the IEP. And, of course, it's good to be knowledgeable about all sections. The important thing to know is that when we're writing goals, we have to first understand the present level of the child. So without that, we're kind of writing goals in the dark. And many times parents come to me and they say, I'll make this simple. All I want is for my child to be at grade level or age-appropriate level. And that's kind of a misnomer, because I don't know all of the children that I get calls about daily. And so everybody has a different story. And that's the whole thing about this law that governs the IDEA, that, you know, it talks about the individual needs of a child. So, of course, the goals should be individualized to your child's needs. So let's start talking about how that should look. There's a couple of things that I always refer back to. First of all, you know, we want to make sure that the needs of the individual child are being met. And how do we do that? Well, we don't do that with trying to oversimplify or, you know, to say, I just want my child to be like every other child, their age, and so forth. Because, you know, as I stated, it's every child's need is individual, and we have to understand that. So the more we know about the ways that our children learn and that the successes they've had in the past, perhaps things that you've been able to work with them at home on, or how they've just learned, you know, the basic things like tying their shoes and taking care of themselves, you know, daily bathroom habits, taking showers, brushing their teeth, things like that. It has implications for the way they learn in school, and we need to realize that. We need to connect the dots. You know, because so many times when I hear a story about a child and the progress they're making or not making, goals have been written on a yearly basis. And now the parent asks me to participate possibly in the IEP, maybe in April or May or even June. And it seems like in the different cases I've been involved with, the parent is finding out the bad news for the first time all year, that no, your child has made no progress towards this goal. And I always say there's something wrong with that. First of all, the communication. You should know if your child's making progress or not, and more specifically, how much progress. And these are the types of things that hopefully we'll get involved in today that will help you understand how to go about that. Okay, so a lot of the a lot of the problems that come up for parents that makes all of this seem so difficult to understand sometimes for us is because, in my opinion, that when kids are assessed, when they're tested, there are so many different test measures, and each test measure has their own way of scoring. And so when you see things of the sort where you get a percentage of the correct questions, where we're all familiar with that daily type of assessment in the classroom, because what we all see as parents is the quarterly grades that come out. And one thing I have to warn people about, because I've seen it happen more times than I can count, is that many times kids are being assessed on a different scale. And sometimes the parents aren't aware of this. And so, you know, I've had parents call me and the issue has been, well, my child's getting good grades. I have nothing to complain about there. But then again, my child isn't learning how to read. My child doesn't have the skills. And I always say there's something wrong with that picture. If your child's grades are being modified, you should know about that, and you should know why they're being modified. It should only happen in a very small number of cases, but if your child happens to fit into the parameters of, you know, who needs to have grades modified, then you should understand that, because the teacher should have explained it to you. And I know, as a parent myself for many years, you know, there were times when I kind of felt, gee, if I ask this question, I'm going to expose my ignorance. But the truth is, by not asking questions, that's where we really hold ourselves back from learning. And when we're talking about the education of our children, you know what? We need to be educated about this stuff. So I would venture to say that even if you feel uncomfortable at times, always ask the question. You know, you need an answer. And if the question is, I don't understand how my child is being assessed, or what this assessment that you're presenting to me means, I would keep asking until I understood it. Because what I've come to understand from learning about this, and you know, I'm not a trained teacher. I didn't go to school to become an educator. I took on this responsibility because I happen to, you know, doing the job of helping to be my own child's advocate. I've learned a few things that has been helpful to other parents. So I just want people to understand that never feel afraid to ask the question, because it's through asking these questions that we really start moving ahead, and we're able to better monitor our children's progress, and more importantly, to know what to do when we see no progress at all, which, you know, it happens a good number of times. So first of all, I want to talk a little bit about the benchmarks, because as we know, every child that has a need, whatever areas they have a need in, academically or socially, any area, there should be a goal written for that, any kind of deficit that you see in your child. And in the past, the way the law worked, there were quarterly benchmarks for all children with IEPs. Today, they were able to take that portion out of the law, specifically for, you know, many students. And there are some children that they still need to write benchmarks for, but that's a very small percentage. As parents, we have the right to request benchmarks even if they're not being written. Now, in order to do that, we have to know what we're asking for, right? So when we talk about the benchmarks, basically, to me, it's just a breakdown of the 4 quarters of the school year to know where our children are in the progress that we've alluded to in their yearly goals. So if we say that by the end of the year, we expect a child to have a certain number of words that they've learned to read, or a percentage of words that they read in any given area to be done correctly, it should be broken down to a 4-quarter kind of section. It makes more sense to me to know after 12 weeks of instruction if my child is on target to hit their end goal at the end of the year, rather than to find out the bad news at the, the end result of the school year, that the child has made no or little progress. So that's one thing I kind of have to alert people to. And so we have these different test measures, and sometimes people are very confused because we're used to seeing, okay, 90% maybe an A or a high B. In the 80s, it's generally a B, 70s a C. So these are general, test scores that would indicate a grade. But then we start looking at all the test measures of assessment that may be used on our children, and we find out, well, the child's in the 11th percentile. And for the average parent, 11th percentile, that seems very low. Well, we don't know what we're comparing. We don't know whom we're comparing our children to. And so, the reaction of the person explaining the assessment to us might be, well, that's just below average for your child's grade, for their age, level. And so it's not like, oh, they earned 11% on a test out of 100. No, that's not it at all. So we have to know what we're comparing. And each test that I've seen come along, it has a different status of the way that we measure things. So never feel that you can't ask that question of the person explaining a test result. That they explain how the child achieved that number, whatever it might be. So, this kind of area, it can become very cumbersome and confusing for us as parents. And I think, sometimes the wording that people use when they're in a certain profession, it's kind of almost designed to keep the layman out of the understanding loop. And what I'm cautioning people here to do is, if you need more information about this stuff, certainly ask the questions. If you don't feel comfortable and you haven't really formulated the question, you could call us at FRCD, and we can help with that type of thing. So, without the basic understanding of the assessment tool that has been used on a particular student, it becomes very difficult for us to to monitor our child's progress. So, one of the things I have to say, especially for younger children, but, sometimes for all of our children. Yes.
Elliot, I actually have a question from Lucia Cueto. She's asking, Can you please repeat the question that we should be allowed to ask when the grades go down? Thank you.
Okay, specifically when a grade is lowered, a child gets a lower grade than they had before previously, is that it?
Lucia, is that the question? Yes, that's what she wants to know.
Well, I mean, we should all know as parents how our child is being assessed. So if the classroom teacher is giving a grade and then the grade changes, it's there to indicate, obviously, they're indicating the progress or the lack of progress of a child. But, more specifically, if it's a goal in the IEP, then that should be explained to us of how that was achieved. Most people understand the basic classroom technique of grading, what the grade represents. But if a child's grades have been modified, for example, because they're not able to achieve, because of their disabling factor, then that should be explained to us. It should be explained to us by the teacher. And, the thing that I'm more concerned about, and certainly there's room for all kinds of different concerns that parents have, but what I'm more concerned about is that I've known parents who have gone into schools with guns blazing, just being upset about, why did you give my child a poor grade? Why did you fail my child? And we should have talked about, before that grade was given, we should have had a discussion about what the criterion was for grading by that teacher. And I think a lot of times when people go to the IEPs, it's almost disguised because there's so much information coming at you, you can't keep, track of everything. And that's one of the difficulties of the IEP process, because they can give us so much information that it's overwhelming. And it happens quite often. It happens probably more often than not. That's why it's always a good idea to bring another person with you to the IEP to try to help take notes, keep track of what's being said, and so forth. Okay, so you also want to make sure, when you're going through your child's goals, when you're deciding upon what the goals need to be and how they have to be stated in the IEP, that the things that you're requesting, the things that the school is explaining to you, that they're aligned properly with the need of the child. So, you wouldn't write a goal that just out and out says, the goal that I have for my child is to be able to read at grade level. No, you'd have to put more specific language in there. What does that child need to hopefully eventually be able to read at grade level? Well, they need different work. Maybe they need different work with their letter recognition. Maybe they need different work with the way that they hear, the way they understand what's being explained to them in class. So that should start coming out as the child's progressing in school, getting older. You should be able to identify that a little better. Also, when a parent is helping a child with their homework, you should be able to tell if your child has made progress or not. What questions are they asking you? What do they not understand? So that should be helpful also in the parent bringing forth information to the teacher. Well, these are the things that my child is having a problem with. Being more specific rather than just saying, oh, my child can't read. What are you going to do about it? So, and another thing I want to state is, as a parent of a child with special needs, I would never put all my eggs in one basket. That is to say, I wouldn't put all the emphasis on the grades my child receives on the report card, because obviously teachers can make changes. Teachers can amend what's on a report card. And unfortunately, I've seen it to the point where some parents that have been angry and upset, they've actually, almost berated the teacher into changing the grade. Well, you can change grades all you want. That doesn't make a bit of difference in what the child has learned. So, if you don't think it's fair that your child with special needs is getting a poor grade, you might be able to browbeat someone into giving them a better grade. But the whole purpose of going to school isn't to get good grades. It's to learn something. And that's what people have to change their attitude about, especially when I see a lot of parents that are used to, maybe their experience in school or their other children's experience, where all of the emphasis has been put on those letter grades. If a child's getting an A or B, oh, I don't have to worry as a parent. But when it comes to special education, that's not necessarily true. So we want to understand why that grade was given. If we disagree, I want to hear more about the situation that has been brought up. Generally, if the child's grades are being modified, it is stated in the IEP. Teachers should not be modifying grades just because that's what they feel like doing, or that's what they may feel sorry for a child, or maybe the teacher feels, well, the child did the best they could. Well, then that should be written in the IEP. If the child does the best they could, I want to be able to give that child an A. Well, that's a conversation to have. That shouldn't be something that the parent's finding out after the fact. So, let's take a look at the whole point of this particular presentation is what they call getting smart about goal writing. So we have what has been termed SMART goals, and that becomes an acronym. And so the S in SMART is specific. And that's something that I'm always telling people. You have to be specific about what you're asking for, what is written in the IEP. So let me go ahead here and talk about that a minute. So all SMART IEPs have some of the similar things, and that is goals that target specific areas of academic achievement as well as functional performance. So like I said before, both areas, not just academics. I've heard many times from school-based people that, all we're concerned about is the academics. Well, I understand that all you're concerned about, but sometimes you need to treat and teach that functional area before you get academic results. So you can't separate them with a child. A child that has functional needs, you can't just ignore that and expect them to, make beautiful progress in their academics, and you don't have to worry about their, mental health issues or social issues or communication issues. Those are all huge, and they can't be denied. But anyway, both of those things need to be directly aligned to the needs that have been identified in the evaluation documents. And for anybody going in to write goals in an IEP, I really caution you to have a good understanding of your child's current levels, as shown in the most recent evaluation, as well as other school progress. We cannot write good, meaningful goals for tomorrow without truly understanding what our child's needs are today. So that is something that I think a lot of times as a parent myself, when my child was much younger, I'm not talking about getting up to, middle school age or high school age, but early on in their education, I think many times we feel as though the teacher knows a lot more than we do, so we're just going to kind of leave that in the teacher's hands. And yes, sometimes we have to trust that the teacher's doing the right thing, but we have to understand exactly what the intent is of that teacher, as how they're going to make, hopefully help our child make progress. So there needs to be clear, well-defined descriptions of the knowledge and the skills that will be taught and how that child's progress will be measured. And like I said before, don't put everything on the report card. Now, for many children with IEPs, they may get, in addition to the regular report card that all the other children in the school gets, they may get an IEP report card. And that may focus, hopefully it'll focus specifically on those goals to show us as the school year progresses how much progress they have made towards their annual goal. And that can be a very helpful thing. But if your child doesn't have it, you are letting yourself in for a rude awakening, towards the end of the school year. If you're not being kept abreast of their, progress during the year, we don't know if they are making any progress towards their goal or not. And that is a scary factor that, sometimes in the school day, a lot of times people feel that they're overburdened and they don't have time to keep that communication with home going. But you should at least know by every report card pickup, by each quarter of the school year, how much progress or not your child is making towards their goals. Now, the measurable portion, obviously, people in schools, teachers are very used to, using those tools of measurement to see if a child's making progress or not. And, in the past, teachers were the ones to tell parents, I think your child should be assessed. There might be an issue. They were the ones on the front lines kind of giving the parent that notion that your child might need to have some kind of extra help. And today, it's just about the opposite. Things have turned around completely, where teachers have been told, you can't alert a parent to the possibility of their child needing something special because we just don't have the resources. Now, the parent still reserves the same right under the law to always ask for assessments when they feel they're warranted. But, don't expect a call from a teacher giving you that information, which, maybe 15, 20 years ago was very common for the teachers to do that. But measurable basically means that you can count, by numbers or observe progress of a child. So if your child's coming home from school and you're working with them on their homework, and you can see that they've learned a new skill over the last few months, or they've gotten better in their reading or their math or whatever, that's great, because then it's actual, you're seeing it through your eyes. It's not something that another party has to tell you, oh yeah, your child has made progress. You're actually seeing the progress, which to me is always more important. It's more encouraging, because it's not as though, we're concerned about our child's progress, of course, and someone else is telling us not to worry, which, may happen from time to time. So having measurable goals in that IEP, it helps us determine, if a child has met a goal, or maybe it's necessary to change that goal, or maybe it's necessary to change the way we're trying to receive that goal. So as parents, just looking at our rights, it's always our right to ask about something, to ask to change something, to ask for something. One thing that isn't our right in particular under the law is to tell a teacher what methodology to use. And basically that's telling a teacher how to teach our child. But if they've tried something and we have proof that it, through our measurement, through our goals not being met, if we can show that our child has not achieved that goal, has not moved closer to it, it might be a time to take a pause and say to that teacher, well, what else can you do? Because you kind of said that this is what you were going to do to teach my child, hoping that it would work, and now we can see that it hasn't worked so far. And I'm a big proponent of keeping close watch on a child's progress, and if they haven't made progress during 1 quarter of school year, I'm not saying a yearly goal is achieved in 1 quarter. I'm just saying if they haven't made any progress towards that goal, I'm a big proponent of going in, having a meeting at the school, and saying, hey, you know what? It hasn't seemed to work. So what else have you got? And that, in that way, I'm asking them, what else can you do to help my child? Because it really gets under the skin of educators if we start telling them how to educate. So, by saying, well, I'm not telling you in specific that I know 100%, because there's no 100% in any of this, that, for example, the Wilson method is the only way my child's ever going to learn to read. Well, that might be your notion, but it's not our right to ask the teacher to use the Wilson method to teach reading. However, if they're using a method and nothing has worked with that method, or 2 methods or whatever, it's definitely our right as parents to say, okay, what else can you try? Because that's what I want to know as a parent. I don't want to be coming into that IEP at the end of the school year to be given the sad news that the child hasn't made any progress. So, like I said before, benchmarks used to be a typical quarterly, showing us how much progress the child has made towards the goal, given to us quarterly. It was in every IEP. Now it's not in every IEP. It's probably only in maybe 5% of IEPs. That's automatically where the teachers, okay, well, I can see that because of your child's particular needs, we need to write quarterly goals to keep you appraised. But in my estimation as a parent, every parent should have access to how much progress the child has made each quarter. So
Oh,
I would be one. Yes.
Yes, we have a question from Tiffany Rupert. Um, she's asking if your child has attention issues, should let me see. Let me see if I can make this wider because it looks like I'm missing letters. Um, yeah, if your child has attention issues, should reinforces or modification or techniques to keep the child engaged be written specifically in the goal, and how the goal will be achieved? Uh, oh yeah, if your child. Does that make sense, Elliot?
Well, okay, the goal is the goal. So that's the outcome that you want. But then you start writing as much information as, as you can, describing how that goal is going to be achieved. What are the things that the teacher will do to help try to achieve those goals? Because we can write pie-in-the-sky goals all day long about what we want, but where the rubber meets the road is describing what that teacher is actually going to do in order to hopefully achieve that goal. And that way, when the teacher comes back some months later and is telling you, well, this is what I've done, but this is the amount of progress or lack of progress, then it's so much easier for us to say, okay, what if we try this now or that now? It's not our right as parents to tell the teacher what to try, but certainly there's nothing in the law that says if what they're doing isn't working, we can't ask for some change made. Because that, to me, is the most rational way to do it. If what you told me was hopefully going to work hasn't worked, what else have you got? And, I'm being very, what's the word I'm going for? I mean, to just say it that way, it may be very dismissive of a teacher. Sometimes they have very thin skins. But, what I have to say is I try to tell it like it is without being discriminatory to the person. Obviously, some teachers have more tools in their chest to work with, but, a lot of times they get kids in their classrooms that are very, very challenging. So I don't want to just dismiss a teacher's ability like that. I want to say, basically, if a teacher has other ideas, what are they, and can we implement them? And if a teacher is all out of ideas, and believe me, I've been there. I've been in IEPs where people have said to me, well, we've tried everything, which to me is just, it's not true, first of all. But if someone is admitting that to you in a school setting, then I think we need to get a different person working on helping the child. But I'm not going to say that, from the first day, I'm going to watch that teacher, and if they haven't helped my child in the first quarter, I'm game to dismiss that teacher. That's a more difficult thing. But back to the question, yeah, the goal is written, and then we describe how, the intention is of how that's going to be achieved. Okay? So,
I was going to say, Tiffany, does this answer your question? Okay, she said yes. Thank you.
Okay, good. Okay, and like I say, I don't know, I mean, I imagine, with all the complaints I get from parents, I imagine that when some parents come into an IEP and they're asking for benchmarks, the school's feeling about this is, well, it's not in the law anymore, so we don't have to do it. And there's a truth to that, but we can still, as parents, we can still request it. Well, why do we want it? For the same reason it used to be there before they changed the law. Because I want to know in each quarter how much progress or how much lack of progress the child is making before we sit down at the end of the year to find out no progress was achieved. So to me, that's important. And then, if they're giving you a hard time about that, certainly call our office. That's another thing we can potentially be helpful with. Okay, go to the next. Okay, so now we're down to the A in SMART, and that stands for action words. So SMART goals use words like, you know, the student will be able to, the student will increase, you know, dot, dot, dot. I mean, you want to use words that, what will the student do? The student is doing something, okay? And, you know, the action-oriented goals help us with defining what we hopefully will observe. It defines basically the student learning. So, you know, be sure that your phrasing, I mean, lots of times we try to help people learn the words, the correct words that help us identify with what the law allows. For example, we talk about just went out of my head. You know, we just want to make sure that the goals are aligned and that we know, you know, the language that's included in the IEP is helping us move to the next thing. It's helping us move along so that we understand. You know, basically the goals, when I'm looking at a new goal, I'm thinking, okay, where is the child right now? This is the goal with what they need. But how much have they improved? How much have they advanced over the last school year? I'm very concerned with that because sometimes kids will, especially with special needs, they'll be, you know, the law says there should be a year's growth for a year's time spent in school, but the years, you know, every year for any different child is different, you know, the amount that they can actually take in and learn. So we want to know where they are today, and that will really help us write the goal that's appropriate for tomorrow. There are a couple of things I want people to look out for, and that is this. Many times we don't see the progress, and I want to know, for example, if there's no progress, has the teacher kept to the program that has been written in the IEP, or have they varied from it? Basically, I just want to know if the teacher has changed automatically. I think a good teacher, if something's not working, is going to try something else. But sometimes we have people so hemmed in by the IEP that the teacher doesn't feel that they have the latitude to move because they're so afraid of, oh, well, this is what I said I was going to do. This is what I promised to do, so I'm not going to do anything different. And so as the parents, sometimes we have to initiate that change. Okay, so I just want to make people aware of that. And also, there's another area which doesn't happen quite as often, but I've heard parents complain about it, and that is there's no progress beyond a certain point, but then if the parent questions the teacher says, okay, well, your child already met that goal, so I'm not focusing on it. And there may be goals. I mean, depending on the child, you know, some children have tons of goals and some only have a few. So if your child only has a few goals and they've met one of them, me as a parent, there's always another goal. So they may have met the goal of reading a certain number of words or whatever it is, but if my child has met that goal, my interpretation of a good teacher would be, okay, now we're on to the next. We want to increase it. If that child has met that goal in the middle of the year, and that's a yearly goal, well, that's great, but why should we stop now? Now, you know, but that's a very particular thing that each parent has to understand in their child. What's that?
Sorry, I accidentally muted you by accident, but I did have a question from a parent. Is it okay if I ask?
All right.
Okay. What information tools do I need to bring to the IEP team to request the creation of a goal in math? Uh, Lucia Cueto is asking, his grades are going even lower from the start of this academic year. So how should she address that if I'm assuming that the goals are not, what's currently in the IEP is not working.
Well, it should be pretty obvious. I mean, if a child already has an IEP, the areas that they write goals for, that should be explained as, you know, here's an area of deficit, but I would have to know more information specifically. I mean, I would invite you to call me afterwards because I would have to know more information. If a child has a deficit in math, I don't know if it's, a slight deficit, if they've made improvements, if their other goals are more pertinent. What is the reason why you feel like you have to bring in evidence and sell them on writing a particular goal? Usually the information they have from whatever assessments have been done, are pretty evident of what goals should be written. Okay?
Okay, and she says she'll call you following the presentation.
All right. So let's go on to the next. Okay, realistic and relevant. Now, I have a problem here because many times I've found parents in the situation where someone in the school, usually the teacher, might be saying, well, your goals for your child or your view of your child may be unrealistic. And I've seen kids that, maybe for a couple of years have made no or little progress, and then they've kind of caught on to something and really moved ahead in 1 year. Now, I'm not going to say that that's something that all kids are able to do, because it is something that it's less likely, it's less, it's been charted less often than, the other students with IEPs, but I have seen it happen. So I don't want to rule out the ability of a child to learn something. And so when they're talking about what's realistic, especially for a younger child, now you have to start looking at, by the time a child's in high school and maybe they haven't really learned to read, maybe they're at a first, second grade level or something, I'm still not ruling out improving their reading, but you have to start realizing by that time, by what has happened in the past, it's probably not realistic to expect a student who's that far off the mark to be at age-appropriate level at any point. So, I'm always a parent who has said not to give up on a child's ability to achieve something. But, yeah, we have to start looking at the reality of what has been tried, what hasn't worked, how have things gone over the years. But I'm always upset when I think educators are giving short shrift to a younger child where they're making predictions. And this has happened over and over again over the years. And I know just recently I was watching a program dealing with a person who is on the autism scale. And that's a huge area where, so much has happened in the last few years. It's just changing, it seems, daily. How many students are identified on the scale and how many students, what the prognosis is, has changed so quickly. And I know that in the past they've said about a lot of students, we don't expect this student will be able to do ... And then the parent sticks with it, and lo and behold, they exceed the expectations as told to that parent. So, I'm never one to say, yeah, just sit back and relax because we don't expect that this child will be able to do, whatever we're talking about. But there's, to me, the word that's more important is relevant. What's relevant to that child? Now, sometimes I'll get a parent who will call me, and believe me, I've talked to thousands of people over the years. So I have a pretty broad sense that, it's not just, well, my child, this is what happened with my child. I've talked to literally thousands of people. And many times, many times I've been told the same kind of story, which is, okay, my child's in junior high or high school, and they have an IEP, and they have, pretty big deficits in different areas. And because their school district says whatever, they're mandating that my child is taking, say, algebra, okay? And my child is passing algebra. I don't know what they're doing in algebra, but they're passing according to the teacher. However, my child cannot make change for $1. My child cannot read the face of a clock. To me, mandating that every child take algebra is, it's ridiculous. It's like saying a child, who's a wheelchair user has to run in a race or they're going to fail gym. It can't happen. So, to me, it's more important that a child's able to do these functional areas of math, like reading a clock or making change for $1 certainly is the most useful thing I can think of when it comes to math, just having an idea about money. And so if I had a child in that situation, I would be using everything I could to say to that school, to say to that teacher, hey, you've got to give something to my child that they can use, something that's relevant to their lives. Not just to say to me, well, we went through the portions of algebra, and yeah, we were able to pass your kid. I don't care. I don't care about algebra at the point where my child cannot functionally use mathematics. So, I'm a big proponent of, for that. I mean, to me, it's just ludicrous that, well, we have to teach this because that's the mandate of our district or our state or our country. I just don't care about that. What is useful and helpful potentially for my child? That's what that's what's important to me. And when we're talking about goals, yeah, there better be someone at that meeting thinking of that. Otherwise, that document could be filled with a whole lot of nonsense. And that's what concerns me. The goals need to be developed by identifying the needs of the child. And if a child cannot make change for $1, I don't think there should be any algebraic needs. It's just not, it doesn't go together. It doesn't make any sense. So, that's something that I really spend some time on. A few years ago when I was helping parents, particularly in the city of Chicago, public schools decided that every 8th grader going into high school, if they weren't at grade level in English and in math, they would be given 2 periods a day of English and math. Now, one of those periods could very likely be this kind of fictitious idea of, well, you have to take algebra, so it doesn't really matter what you're learning. We just want to check it off on our list that we've given you a period a day of algebra. And whether you're falling asleep in that class, not understanding a word the teacher's saying, come hell or high water, we're going to give you that class. That, to me, is something that I was battling from the moment they came out with that rule, and telling them how ridiculous it was that students that wanted to perhaps take a shop class, that wanted to be an auto mechanic, that had ideas of things they enjoyed and things they could do, rather than being able to take that particular class, they couldn't because they had to take another math class and another English class because that's what their scores showed. That's more about the district than being about the student. And I'll fight every case that I hear that's brought to me like that. Okay, so making sure that it's relevant to me as a parent is where it's at. And if other people don't think something is realistic, it may or may not come to pass. but, we still may want to fight for things that we don't want to give up on. It's our prerogative as parents. And another piece that's really, really important, and sometimes people really have fought to get things written in their child's IEP, and so by the time it comes around to putting time boundaries on, like an end date of a service or an end date of, we expect them to meet this goal by this date, sometimes we kind of forget about it or we don't have enough time to add it in. This is a very important part of an IEP because if we have a timeline on there, then if something hasn't worked, we can come back and ask for a change. It's a very simple way of saying, well, you told me that by April 1st, you were going to have this accomplished, and it hasn't happened. So what are we going to do now starting April 2nd? That's what I want to know as a parent. Not that, oh, you're apologizing or you're blaming my kid for the lack of progress, but that if the progress isn't made, what we're going to do differently. Because that, to me, is everything. And that's where I had a good amount of control over my own child's IEP. Because before I understood that, I just kind of went along and, whatever they were telling me, okay, that sounds good. That sounds good. And sometimes there'd be progress and sometimes there wouldn't be. It was mixed. It wasn't a story of, brutal, no progress ever made. No, my son made progress much of the time. And then there were times when it was really a struggle and, it was a hard-fought battle, But if we include those timelines in the IEP, we're much better off. We're better prepared to come back and say, okay, this hasn't worked. I'm not blaming anyone, but what are we going to do next? What are we doing now that we understand that this hasn't been a good tactic to try to work on this student's problems? We want to understand, the important milestones that need to happen in order for a student to acquire these skills or a new level of proficiency with the skill, because some of the battles that I've heard more recently have been around the amount of progress a child has made. Like the child hasn't made the expected progress, but the teacher's claim is because they've made any progress at all, I'm off the hook, or I've done my job, basically, is what, they're being told. And, there's some truth to that. And not every child is going to make all the progress that we hope for. But we have to know as a parent, is this, am I going to allow things to keep going in this direction considering the lack of progress my child has made? Yeah, the expectations have to be realistic, but we don't know where that word realistic is until we get a lot of other data. How much progress has the child made over the last few years, few months, leading up to where we are today. And so we start when we have more time to look back upon what has happened or not happened in our child's education. We have a better map for moving forward. So I know it's more difficult when you have a younger child because there's just so much up in the air. But, my rule of thumb is, yeah, have a lot of expectations for your child, but then, time will give you information about how well they're progressing. And so we'll have that data to use as, year by year as we move forward. We all know that the IEP needs to be reviewed annually, at least. And so the law says it needs to be reviewed annually. I've had some parents who've been talked out of doing that by a school because, we don't want to take up your time and have you come down here. Basically, your child's at the same place he was a year ago. Well, that's a scary proposition I mean, yeah, some kids are moving a lot slower than others. That is understandable. But I want to know what's happening. And, if we can't show much progress, maybe it's time to try a new tactic. So we all know that we have the right as parents to ask for a new IEP, even though it may not be a year that's passed. And especially when there are difficulties where, either we're getting a lot of complaints from the school or we're getting a lot of complaints from our children. And so if the child who's complaining about, I just don't get this, I'm trying, people think I'm stupid, whatever they're saying, listen to that child. Because what I've found is there are a lot of kids that aren't going to speak up because they're just trying to hide it. And I think that's just a very human thing, to try to hide whatever difficulties or differences that we as humans have. It just seems to be such a rational thing that kids don't want to draw that attention to themselves. So, keep an eye, when we're writing the IEP, talk about the time, and that leads back into the benchmarks, which it makes more sense, because if we can see benchmarks each quarter, that timeline, we can, if it's not going well towards that final yearly goal, we can make corrections during the year. And I think a lot of people in a lot of schools, they don't want to be bothered with making changes and corrections. And that's why it's important for us to keep an eye on it and kind of bring it up when we think it's necessary. Is a goal smart or not smart? Well, we have a few spelling errors here. Anyway, so with some of the questions posed here, or the statements made here, is it smart or not smart? So if you took the first one, Walter will improve his reading fluency. It's too general. It's too general to be a SMART goal. Yeah, every parent wants their child to improve their reading fluency, but that as a goal would not be able to stand up. You're not putting enough specific information into it. Okay, so now you add a time. Walter will improve his reading fluency by May of 2014. Okay, well now you've put a time on it, but you're still just saying will improve. You're not saying how or how much. And so now you're going to add a little bit more. Walter will improve his reading fluency as evidenced by reading at a rate of 85 correct words per minute by March 2014. Okay, well now you're saying how much improvement you expect. You're saying when you expect that improvement to be made by. But, this might be a better example of what you would say in the IEP. Given direct reading instruction and guided practice opportunities, Walter will improve his reading fluency skills as measured by reading at a rate of 85 correct words per minute on a grade level passage of 100 words by the end of fourth quarter of second grade. And to me, that's perfectly good. That's a SMART goal. But that opens up the question of, okay, could we have a little bit less of a correct words on the third quarter benchmark? Could we have a little bit less than that for the second quarter and the first? So that if my child has made, say, 20 correct words per minute for the first quarter, okay, I can see how he's moving towards the goal, but we're going to have to step it up a little bit to be able to meet 85. And like I say, we already discussed the fact that it's really important to know the present level. So say he was at 0 correct words, 0 to 20 is, that's good. 0 to 20 is good. But if we're 15, starting at 15, and the first benchmark was 20, or that's what he hit for the first quarter, that's not too many. 5 words in 1 quarter, you'll never get to 85 by the school year, most likely. So, keep an eye on that, because it kind of guides us. If we can get them to write, the number of correct words per minute and the level passage of words into the goal, then that, to me, presents a good guideline for what the benchmarks should be for each school quarter. Okay, so here we talk about writing your own SMART goals. The expectation for 1 written in complete sentences about a given topic. Johnny's significantly delayed writing skills impact his ability to participate fully in the general education curriculum. The average writing score for first grade at this time is generating 3 supporting details. First grade is an overall rubric score of 4. Here again, they're using the language of teachers. So sometimes we'll come into a meeting and they'll be talking about rubrics. My first inclination was to say, okay, what is a rubric? I'm not a teacher. Well, a rubric is basically a building block. When you're teaching, it can be compared to building a structure. You have to start with a good foundation. You can't just talk about things out of the blue. It has to be based on, what the child has already learned, what do they already have in their bank to build upon. So, kind of like the situation I pointed out a little while ago about putting a student into a algebra class who couldn't do functional mathematics. What are they really learning in that algebra class? And my answer is basically pretty much nothing. I'm sure there are exceptions to the rule. I'm sure there are always exceptions. But to mandate that all kids that are below average in math need to take 2 maths a day, as if that's going to improve things, there's no indication in my mind that just spending more time on something that's more difficult is the answer. That's where the IEP comes in. How is that time going to be spent is the real answer. So, for people that are looking at this thinking, well, I'm not a teacher, this is like Chinese to me. Yeah, they can write things that way, but still, we have the right to have it explained to us. It all comes down to how off the mark is the given student. How far behind the average first grade curriculum, the first grade class at this time of the year is the child. And it may be, it may be very great, or it may be, just a few months. In any case, we need to deal with it on a case-by-case, type of situation. So this is just a quick review, but, putting things together that we talked about. First of all, the goals must be SMART. And we need to understand what each piece of that is. The annual goals describe the student's expected yearly learning outcomes as a result of receiving special education services. So, like I say, many parents over the years, I just want my child to be at grade level. I just want my child to be this or that. And when I start hearing more and more people say that, I get it. I'm that parent. I was that parent too, years ago. But basically what we're saying is, I just don't want my child to have a disability. And, all the special education in the world isn't going to change the fact that a child has a disability. It's not going to catch them up. There are situations where a child might go from a special education classroom into a regular education classroom. But when a child has a deficit, that needs to be dealt with. Some deficits, we might see great progress, and we might see them entering into a whole new, spectrum of abilities and being able to be in a regular school setting. But generally, kids that have IEPs don't just grow out of them. There are a few exceptions of very early IEPs that may be just basically for speech. But kids that have learning disabilities, they turn into adults that have learning disabilities. And if you're on the spectrum, you're on the spectrum. You might make great progress, but it's something that you still deal with. And so to me, the most difficult thing about being a parent advocate is the part where parents ask me for advice on teaching the child self-advocacy. That is very, very particular to each student. But one thing that I do recommend is, and we're just here to talk about the goals today, but I always recommend that children are allowed to attend at least a few minutes of their IEP meetings way before the law insists on it. And in Illinois, the law insists on it at 14 and a half. And that's when they go into transition and they need to be a part of their own IEP. Well, what I found in kids with special needs, even though the needs might be totally different, way, way different. But one thing that I found that is very common amongst many kids with many different labels is they need more time to prepare. They need more time to get it together. So that if you start them way before they're 14 and a half and just getting a taste of what the meeting is about, then they should be better prepared to lead the meeting as much as they can when they're in transition. So that's something I always recommend. And to always check in with the child as much as they can express their own needs and so forth of what their hopes are for improvement and things that are important to them. We want to make sure that kids are getting what they need, not just what we as adults say they need. Because, yes, we have to make decisions for them. That's our jobs. But, many times we kind of start flying through this stuff, and it's so time-consuming, and there's so much information that we forget the most important person, which is the child. Progress, progress is reported differently to different people. Everybody should be getting a regular report card 4 times a year, but not everybody has an IEP report card delivered to the parent depending on their needs. So if you feel the need, and I think it's something that probably most kids with IEPs should have IEP progress report sent home as many times a year as the report card. It helps inform us of where the child is. And if we disagree, that's another area to bring up. I would always bring it up in a letter, just questioning things, because sometimes in meetings there's so much to go through, it's hard to bring in a new topic. And so we don't always want to be that voice of disagreement. I mean, certainly if we disagree, we want to raise our concerns. But I would always, if I disagreed with some of the basics of, I don't understand my child's progress, I don't understand the lack of progress, I don't understand you not reporting it to me, these are the kind of things I would put in a letter and hopefully get the information before the next meeting so that I would have more of an idea of the progress made by my child in this school year. Like I say, not everybody has benchmarks written in. It's still our prerogative as parents to ask about benchmarks, to try to write that in the IEP. You know, whatever we write as a goal, it has to be based on the current level of ability of the child. And it's always important to remember that if we feel like a new series of assessments are needed, that's another thing to put in writing and ask for if it's not your triannual year. Yes?
Yes, I actually have a question from a parent, Lucia Coito. Is it okay if I ask? Okay,
Yes.
can I request to review the benchmarks of the last IEP goals at any time? Knowing that this is not mandatory anymore, how long should I wait for them to answer back?
I'm not sure. I mean, that's waiting, you know, the amount of time you wait. When you write a letter to your child's school, and there are two different ways that you have to deliver it because you need a receipt to show that the date that you delivered it, they need to respond to you within 14 school days by letter. One is to send it certified mail, and that way you get a receipt from the post office. The other one is to bring it to the school office, ask the secretary to make a copy of your letter and to stamp date it with the school stamp. That signifies that you have proof that you've made a request of your child's school. They should respond to you within 14 school days. And then if they don't, you could call us and we can help you with that. But that's the basic way to, when you ask for something where they don't absolutely have to say yes, but we want to get a record of what they're going to say to you. Because if it's in writing, they can't misinform you as easily if they just say it to you. I've had many people, including myself, be told information that's totally wrong. And because they're saying it to you, there's no proof that they said it. So they don't feel responsible. Like, you know, this parent can't get me in trouble for telling them that they can't have this or that the law doesn't allow us to do this, you know. So putting that together in a letter, just making a simple request. But I wasn't quite sure the way it was stated, if there were already benchmarks in the IEP and you're just asking to see them again. I don't really...
I think there were, because she wanted to review the benchmarks of the last IEP goals. And then, you know, so she was requesting, can I review the benchmarks of the last
right.
IEP?
Well, yeah, I mean, you can always request a new IEP meeting. It could be for a huge variety of reasons. And certainly talking about, you know, if your child hasn't made progress, if your child has met benchmarks and then the teacher is not moving ahead to the next thing, these are all reasons for wanting to kind of put a new, make any changes in the benchmarks. So either side of the coin, whether the child has made little progress or the child has met their goal or met their benchmark, you know, we might want to have a conversation about what's coming next. And I know sometimes schools don't like it when we're being so specific and asking things, but that's truly the way to do it because, I mean, I can understand that if a teacher has a parent who is, you know, just badgering them every day for, you know, to get their child's goals met or to do something different or better. I understand that pressure and that way of doing things. But if you understand what's going on with your child and you're just asking for some kind of change to be made because of, you know, either they've made no progress, little progress, or, you know, they've reached the goal or the benchmark, and now we want to write a new one. Either way is a good reason for asking for that. Okay.
Okay, and she said thank you, so that answers her
Oh,
question.
okay. Good. Good. All right. Um, are there any other questions about the goals that we just talked about?
Um, at the moment, I'm not seeing any additional questions. Um, but I actually had a question.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things you pointed out in your presentation was, thinking way beyond school. So particular
Mm-hmm.
skills, not necessarily focusing on academic skills, but life skills as well, if I heard you correctly. So let's say you are a parent who is thinking ahead. For example, you may want your child to be able to write his name in the chance that he or she may want to apply for a job, or for
Mm-hmm.
whatever reason, and
Yeah.
the school is very skeptical that your child will be able to reach that point, and they may not even want to approach it. As a parent, how do you fight to at least get steps taken so that possibly he or she may be able to accomplish that one day? Does my question
Well,
make sense?
seen I've seen a lot of IEPs with things that parents want written in there just because maybe, and I'm being kind of harsh here, which I'm generally not, but, just because the parent hopes that one day the child will be able to do it. That's the prerogative of a parent to have it written in there. But as far as what things are actually happening in school, it has to be attached to what the child's able to do today. It's great to say, I want my child to be able to do X, Y, Z. There's so many things I can't even, give you an example. But, it all starts where, the child is today, the reality of where's the child functioning, and so what can the teacher work on today to get them to the next level? Because like I said before, it's a building block. And you need those blocks to be in order to have a solid foundation. You can't just, and some people, some people are very difficult. There are some areas where kids can do things at a much higher level and then other things at a much lower level. But that's one particular area. That's more of a learning disability factor, where kids might be really, really bright and have very high abilities, but then in other areas, very low abilities. But when you're talking about the functionality, and I'm kind of entering into an assumption here, which is never good to do, to make an assumption, but, we start generalizing, believe me, after years and years of doing this. The function of a child, where you have a child where the school is assuming, well, this child will never be able to do X, Y, Z, read, write, math. And it's the hope of every parent that the child will be able to do more than what's, being put on the plate there, what they're, basically telling the, what the school is telling the parent. It's like, I never want to hear proclamations made like that, because we just don't know. We've had kids that have just gone beyond those areas. But as far as what should they be doing today, for example, I never knew in my particular case if my son would be able to drive a car. It wasn't because he couldn't learn the rules of the road. It was for physical reasons. When he turned 16 and he wanted to get his license, I had to take him to the rehab center, and they certified him as being safe to drive. I couldn't have ever made that prediction. I just didn't know. So yeah, there are lots of unknowns. It's definitely the scary part of being a parent, but we have to work with what we have today. And yes, we all dream of our kids being as independent as possible. But we have to start now with what can they do, what can't they do, what are the reasons for this, and we start building those blocks to get them to the, hopefully to the best place they can be.
Thank you, Elliot. So at this time, I'm not seeing any additional questions. So
Right.
At this point, I believe we can close the webinar. Thank you, Elliot, for your presentation.
Thanks.
And thank you, everyone, for attending today's webinar. And a handout regarding resources and this presentation will be emailed to you within the next couple of days. Thank you and have a wonderful week.
Very good. Bye.